Hello, everybody. It's Softball Grandpa here again. My name is Rich. I am an alcoholic, recovering alcoholic and addict, old carpenter, grandpa, and this. I saw this on my refrigerator, and this is never give up. This is my granddaughter Dayla. She's pitching for a high school out in Riverside, Moreno Valley. But anyway, I had a talk with her yesterday. She called me up, or maybe I called her up, and she told me that her mother had blocked her phone from her contacts because, for the reason that she doesn't have self-restraint. And I told her, we had a conversation. I said, well, if you don't have self-restraint on social media, and she said, yeah. And I said, well, is that a problem? And she says, no. I said, well, if your phone's taken away, is that a problem? She said, yeah. So what's the solution? So she has to work on the solution. We had a nice little talk. And I talked to her about how I met her grandmother, my ex-wife. And it was back in maybe right now, 1980 or something like that. I'm not sure the exact date. But it was at Les Papillons in Monrovia, California. And this place was like a nightclub with dancing, always band every night. It was, I call it a meat market. And the first time I told my granddaughter, the first time I saw her grandmother, I said to myself, what's a nice girl like this doing in a place like this? And I asked her to dance, and after we danced, I said, can I get your phone number? And she gave me her phone number. And I ran out to the truck to write it down because I didn't have a pen to write it down. And I had to remember it because, she was, we got married, and the rest is history. Then I told her about how maybe I shouldn't talk about this, but after we got married, she went off the pill and she got pregnant. And me being, brand new to the pregnancy thing, I didn't know what to do, so I wasn't really into it. And then she lost the baby in her first trimester, and I saw what it did to her. And I said to myself, you're a dick. What the hell's wrong with you? So when she got pregnant again, I got into the pregnancy and I kissed her belly. Every morning I'd rub her belly, and after 2 months she had like a little bump, and I told her at 2 months that she was going to have twins. At 4 months the doctor says, you're getting too big, and I had two buddies of mine, Mark and Kirk. They were twin brothers, and they were fraternal. They were 1 year younger than me, and I told them that I was having twins, and they said, nah, I said, no, we're having twins. And I said, I'll put money on it, and at 4 months, we went to the hospital and had the, excuse me, had the ultrasound done, and lo and behold, there's two heartbeats and two heads, and Joey was spread eagle. I could see his little pecker, and Jeffrey was in the fetal position. Didn't know, if it was a boy or a girl, but they were born in 1984, February 5th, 6:37, 6:38 in the morning. C-section at Huntington Memorial in Pasadena, And when I was walking to the phone to call my mom, my feet were like 2 feet off the ground. I was just floating. It was a pretty neat thing. But I was talking to my granddaughter about this, and I told her, I said, ask Grandma, when she gave you a ride home from school, when you take opportunity when you're driving to talk to your grandma and ask her questions. How was it when you were 17? Do you have a boyfriend? Were you working? What were you doing? When I was in high school, I worked all the way through high school. I'd have Jimmy Franson give me a ride on his motorcycle to Jack in the Box after school, and I'd go to work, and then I don't know how I got home. Maybe my brother would come pick me up or something, but that's just how it was back there in the 70s, we were footloose and fancy free. I think they made a movie like that, Footloose, with Kenny Loggins or John Travolta or somebody like that. You know, but um, I am a recovering alcoholic and an addict, and when I was 17, we were doing stuff that we shouldn't be doing, smoking pot, and after high school, drinking beer, stuff like that, but um, it's just it is what it is again. I asked my granddaughter, she said she wants to see me, and I said, well, I'll give you a ride to school tomorrow. I'm 65 miles from her. And I said, I'll pick you up at 7. And her eyes, I could see, I could hear through the phone that her eyes got real big. Grandpa, and I said, what, you're not going to have your makeup done? I said, you have to go to school without makeup? I'll be there at 7 o'clock, and I'm not going to pick her up. But if she wanted me to, I would have, because that's, it's an hour drive. I don't mind driving. I got heated seats, helps my back, So the thought of the day, never give up. We make a decision to do something, and we have to keep pedaling that bike. I've told my oldest sister this, and let God hold the steering wheels. He'll guide you wherever you're going to go. So never give up. Just keep pedaling. Sometimes we pedal fast. Sometimes we pedal slow. Sometimes we just coast. But we still have to, have our feet on the pedals. Don't take your feet off. Just keep the feet on. Because if you keep your feet on, you make goals and you're eventually going to get there. Sometimes quickly, sometimes slowly. They will always materialize if you work for them. That was a section out of the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And but with that said, thank you for listening. Feel free to share this to whoever. And God bless. Be kind to your people. And talk to the old folk and ask them if they need help. And, the definition of love. My old sponsor gave me the definition of love. Love is doing something for somebody else for fun and for free because you want to, with no expectation in return. Thank you and God bless. Peace out.